So some of what we have on our agenda this afternoon is to just understand a little bit more about the demographics of the workforce in both of the systems. And so we wanted to start first with our human resources at the state level and understand some of the demographics of our state workforce. And so I see you've prepared us a wonderful presentation. We'll let you go ahead and take it away, and then hopefully there will be time for questions at the end.
And I just want to throw in here that if anybody has questions beyond this with the, on the state workforce, the workforce report, that this is just part of it, but the workforce report that's done every year is really thorough and gives everything, like temporary employees and how many there are and where they are, limited service employees and everything. So it's a really good report if you're interested in the state workforce at all.
All right. Well, thank you, Senators White and Representative.
We're going to, first of all, I think we should do this. We did with this with Beth, for Beth. And we're going to just introduce ourselves and why we're here, who appointed us, so that you'll know where we're from. So, Corey, do you want to start this time?
Sure. Senator Corey Parent. I was appointed by the Canadian Committees.
Dan Travier, appointed by the Troopers Association.
I am Leona Watt, and I was appointed by BSC.
I'm Kate, appointed by Vermont NTA.
John Gannon, appointed by the Speaker of the House.
Sarah Copeland Hansis, appointed by the Speaker of the House.
Jeanette White, appointed by the Committee on Committees.
Eric Davis, appointed by VSCA.
Andrew Emmerich, kindergarten teacher, appointed by Vermont.
I'm Mike Pichek, Commissioner at the Department of Education.
I'm Molly, I'm a teacher appointed by Vermont.
Fagan, appointed by the Speaker.
Thank you. Okay, now
Okay.
take it away.
I'm Beth Fastigi. I'm the Commissioner of Human Resources for the state of Vermont. And with me today is Harold Schwartz, who's our Director of Operations, and Doug Pine, who's the Deputy Director of Operations. And the committee asked us to come in and talk about some specific demographics of the workforce. So as Senator White pointed out, one of her favorite reports, of which Doug Pine is actually the guru of that report, so he gets to hear your praise in person, is our workforce report. We publish that every January. So there's a lot of information. The web address is right here, and if you're online, you should be able to click through it through the presentation. But lots of statistics on there. Some of the slides we have updated with fiscal year 21 data, and some are fiscal year 20 data. So the ones we tried to update. The first two pages that have executive branch at a glance for fiscal year 2020 on here. We're not going to go into these in detail here because I have a lot of slides that kind of elaborate on those. But what I just want to say at first is this is the executive branch at a glance. It's not the judiciary or the legislative branch. So the folks that participate in the retirement system, there are judiciary as well as legislative branch folks that participate in the retirement system. This report and these statistics don't really count them. If you're adding those together, it's about 10,000 employees. So I'm sure the treasurer will have information on the number participating in the retirement system of those. And this is for fiscal year 2020. So this is data that's good up until June of 2020. We have had another fiscal year in the meantime, but our report for next year isn't generally submitted until January. So going through some of these numbers here, just the number of employees, I have a whole slide on that, so I'm actually gonna skip talking about that. This also talks about full-time equivalents, and most of our employees are full-time, and you can see that related to there. The average age of employees, we break the report out a lot by the generation, we call that, and I'll go over that in another slide. Average years of service as well, and the length of service, we have slides on as well as the percentage represented by a bargaining unit. You can see in the state service as made up of classified and exempt employees, typically only mostly only classified employees are eligible to be members of state unions. And so overall, about 85% represented by a union in the executive branch, but it's the 92% classified versus 44.2% exempt. And I can go over of the people in a bargaining unit. So there's a small number of exempt employees in the bargaining unit. Talent acquisition, that's about recruitment. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We do have a slide on numbers there, but we did in fiscal year 2020, we hired 938 employees. Most of those are classified employees, 880 classified employees with 58 exempt employees.
Yep.
Yep.
Of that 938, were how many, do you know how many were replacing other employees or how many were actually new positions?
For fiscal year 22, I can pretty confidently say it's less than a wash. We actually decreased positions, I think, in fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2020.
Okay.
So it might have been a new position doing something different, but it would have replaced somebody doing
Okay.
something else.
All right, thanks.
And then we have the average age of hires there, and we go down around by demographics. One of the things we were asked to talk some more specifically about the number of people with how many years of service and related to retirement, employee salaries, open positions, hard to fill positions. So we will go through that. Also the amount of overtime, which is, there's some numbers on the next page. We didn't go into detail until overtime as well, but you can find that in the workforce report. Tables 53, 54A, and 54B give overtime by department over a series of years. So if there are folks that are interested in that, that's available in the workforce report as well. On the next page, this is just basically the first at a glance page on the workforce report. We'll be talking about turnover, retirement eligibility, overall compensation, and then we don't get, on these slides, we don't get too into equal opportunity employment or demographics, whether male or female, but that's all in the workforce report. We have a big section on that. So table 2 is on, I don't know if your report is numbered, but it's page 5. So this is the size of our workforce, and it kind of tells the growth of the workforce over time. You can tell the blue part on the bottom, the majority of our workforce is classified with the numbers of exempts at the top. So fiscal year between 2020 and 2021, we were pretty level between 2019 and 2020, just up by 17 people. And up 20 in classified, down 3 exempt. But then if you move into fiscal year 21, we did go down from 8,317 to 8,012 employees. We had a hiring freeze for a good part of the pandemic. If you remember, during the pandemic, we were very concerned about the economy and our revenues for the state. So we wanted to make sure that we had enough resources to pay employees. And so we were very careful about hiring in fiscal year 21. But we definitely expect that number of employees to bounce back and likely increase in fiscal year 22. As you know, the legislature has authorized a bunch of new positions in state government with that are going to be used in line with the American ARPA funds. So we've got, we're anticipating a lot of new hires and to increase the number of employees in the coming year.
Commissioner
Yep.
Suji, could I just ask that decrease in 21, was that accomplished mainly through attrition or like not, holding
Yes.
positions open?
Yeah, holding positions open. We did not have any layoffs as a result or risks as a result of the pandemic. Just we may have had a layoff related to no work in that area, but not, we did not do any furloughs or any layoffs as a result of the economic situation related to the pandemic in the state.
Thank
Yep.
you.
So I have table 7, which is a little easier to read, and that does break down the percentage of employees by classified and exempt. also have age distribution on there. The average age of a state employee is 45.3 years old. We go into the generational things, but those are not generational. Those are 10-year ages, but then we also talk about generation and different generations and where they're aging out of the workforce a little bit later.
Would you tell me, maybe you're gonna do this later, but I am always confused about who is Generation X, who's a millennial, and who's a Generation Z.
Yes, we do have that for you.
I never can.
Let's flip
I know
over.
baby boomers.
It's table 16B
Oh, okay.
on page 8, if you numbered your pages, but on the table there, it does talk about how, this kind of shows the changing demographics. So the baby boom generation is the blue circles on that graph. And it shows that's the generation that's born between 1964 and 1946. So that's age 57 to 75 in 2021. So you can see as that age group begins to retire and move out of the workforce, you see those numbers decreasing over time, where you see the millennials really increasing, as well as the Generation X, which is, I'm on that Generation X, which is 1965, right? So I missed the baby boom by 1 year.
So 65 to,
65 to 80. So that's the biggest makeup of our workforce right
oh,
now.
I see, there it is.
And when you combine both Generation X and millennials, that's the
Okay.
majority of our workforce. That's about 72% of our workforce. And I think we can probably I'm not sure if I need to even go through any of those other slides anymore. We probably can just stay on the slides. Oh, no, let's go back one slide to 7. You'll see length of, which I think is important for this group. It's the length of service based on age distribution. So the biggest distribution of employees is actually less than 5 years as a chunk. And then it's divided up into 10-year chunks along that. So also 34% have worked here between 5 and 15 years. You've got 15 to 25, 34%, and then, that's 18%. And then 25 to 35 years, that's 7.8% of our employees. And then over 35 years is 2.1%. So that, I think, is it was kind of important statistics for this group to be talking about when you're thinking about pension changes, just the kind of the age, the length of service for state government definitely impacts where they are on the pension scale and actually what pension plan they're in. The annual base salary distribution also is there. Most employees make between $55,000 and $65,000 per year. That's 25% of employees, and you can see the numbers surrounding that are make up more, and then kind of tapering graph. But yep, go ahead,
I
Doug.
was going to say on the length of service, it's, the fact that the largest percentage is less than 5 is indicative of the fact that the greatest amount of turnover, the highest percentage of turnover happens in the first 5 years. So we have a lot of people with 5 or fewer years of experience, and if we keep them more than 5 years, generally they're not going to leave. So a very large percentage of turnover happens in that first 5 years. That's what the percentage is so high.
And
Oh,
I'm wondering, do you have the length of service connected with age as well? Do you have that broken down separately somewhere? I'd just be curious to know what the age is on some of these people here, less than 5 years, you're from 5 to 15. Just to kind of get a sense of the workforce. There's a lot of people entering second careers or.
Some in the last slide, we go into that a little bit.
Is that something we could get more information for another time? If you don't have that fit?
Maybe.
So for the length of service,
connected to their age. So, you know, some people who are 30 maybe are in that 5 to 15 years of service already at that point. However, there might be a lot of people that are less than 5 years at age 30 or just kind of continuing to go through that kind of age progression. I know you had it broken down by about 10-year chunks before. I'd love it if it could even be less than 10-year chunks. I mean, if you have 26.6% of people age distribution between 45 and 54, but the majority of those 26% are at 53, 52. It just gives a wide gap. I'm just curious to see what it would also look like at smaller age.
We'll see what we can do. I did want to just, oh, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, the length of service distribution, understanding this is a snapshot in time, I'm trying to think about how it connects to the drivers on the pension side. Is this distribution typical, or does it reflect changing?
This is different. If you go back, it's the less than 5 is consistent at the highest group.
Thank you, very helpful.
We'll tie that on the very last page. We'll tie that to.
Thank you.
One thing I did want to just let people know who aren't familiar with the terms classified and exempt employees. Exempt employees are primarily attorneys that work for the state and then appointed officials. Those are the most common type of exempt employees. But most employees, career employees would be considered in the classified service, except for attorneys and that's it. Yeah.
There is a table, I think I gave you.
Yeah.
Look in the big book if you want.
There's a table in the big book that talks about which types of positions would be considered exempt from the classified service, and classified service is just a different construct than they have in the private sector. But essentially, those employees have a property interest in their job, so it's more job protection than you might have in the private sector. Simplified.
I might pose a question.
Just to answer Andrew's question, actually, in the evaluation, I told them actually there's a table on the back which shows the active members by age and by years of service.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Treasurer Clausen.
Can you hold up the front?
Okay, yeah, this is for last year as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So the generational shift slide that we already kind of reviewed, that was our slide 8. And then moving on to slide 9, which is our total compensation for classified executive branch employees. We talk about the total compensation when we talk about kind of the value that employees receive for working for the state of Vermont, and also kind of when we're talking about the cost of an employee. So total pay is a part of it. So this average employee, total compensation for the average pay for an executive branch employee may make $67,000 a year, but their total compensation was about $102,000 a year, close to $103,000 a year. The health insurance is a big part of that. $102,000 is 13% of that. Average $14,000 worth of health insurance policy. The retirement system value for the employee is about 14% of that $102,000. FICA, and then the other things, dental, workers' comp, life insurance, kind of a tiny little part of that.
Question on this slide, does retirement, does this represent the normal cost, or does it include the amortization?
That is the percentage of the total comp package that the employee is seeing the value on going to retirement. So it's not the 21.4%. Talk about that later. It's, which I know you know, but
Thank you.
yeah. And then on the next page, it kind of
Can
breaks.
I just ask the question, if you, so the percentage of 67 to 102, would the kind of same percentage hold for other positions? I mean, you'd add approximately the same percentage to get the total compensation package.
Somebody with a lower salary will have a higher percentage of health insurance in the
Okay.
total comp because you get the same health insurance plan value, no matter if you make $150,000 a year or if you make, $40,000 a year, again, the same value of health insurance. The retirement will change because that's a percentage based on a percentage of your salary, but the health insurance benefit is going to become a bigger percentage as your salary lowers. The rest of them won't shift around very much.
I just want to clarify the answer to the prior question. The 14,000 change for the retirement, 21.4%, that's the state retirement contribution in FY20. That represents that, but that's as a percentage of the pay, not as a percentage of the total comp. So you take the 14,000 divided by the 67,000, and that's the 20%.
Okay.
So I understand that can be a little.
And the next page on there, page 10, just puts the numbers out there for you in a different table and gives it in a bigger picture. So it's talking about the total cost of payroll for state government, the total pay, the total comp and benefits for fiscal year 2020. So that's $781 million when you're talking about compensation for state employees in that time frame. For classified employees, right? Where's that total comp?
Yes.
That's classified. Most of the workforce report, which is looks at data on the classified workforce. It's a larger percentage of workforce, and it's a good approximation. There are some exempt employees that do participate in the defined benefits pension plan. They have a choice, so some also participate in the defined contribution plan instead. And actually, the next slide kind of talks about this. This is the retirement contribution allocation as a percentage of pay. So this is what Eric was asking about. So the state share in fiscal year 21 was 21.4% of pay. And then due to mostly demographic changes, that percentage to continue to meet our obligations for the paying down of the liability of our retirement plan moved up this year. It's going to be 25.5%. So that was a big increase over the past year. And you can see also the employee share for the defined benefits contribution is 6.65% of their salary, and that will continue to be for fiscal year 20. And also, oh, there's another typo, Mike. Thank you. That's a fiscal year 22 also, moving over there. So there's a little typo there. Right now, I think you probably know this already, but the other cost for retirement, we call the OPEB, which is primarily the employee, the retiree health insurance, which we pay for now on a pay-go basis. So that number is in that 25.5% is part of that state share that we're paying is to pay for the health care for people who have already retired. If we were going to start paying down that liability and just do a very simple amortization schedule for what our OPEB liability is, we would need another 9% on top of that payroll to pay that down. So that's just to give you a magnitude of that. Also on this graph, it's just showing you that the percentage of payroll costs allocated to retirement has been increasing over time, and it took in the past couple of years, it's taken quite a bump up. We have also here, just wanted to talk about the other two retirement options we have. We have the defined compensation plan, which is an option that exempt employees can choose. So the state share for that is 11%. There's no liability there because the state pays into it. And then once they pay that, it goes into a fund that's pretty much managed by the employee, and the employee share for that is 2.85%. And then all employees have the opportunity to participate in the deferred compensation plan, which they can save up to a lot of money there. And they can choose before tax or after tax. So that's another good way to save for retirement. There's no state match to that, but it's still a good savings tool.
Did you say that some workers have the option to be in the defined benefit program? They can choose to be in the defined benefit versus being in the defined contribution plan?
Right, when exempt employees have an opportunity when they're hired to choose which plan they want to go into. So
Okay.
I'm an exempt employee. I was appointed in 2017. I had the opportunity to choose if I wanted to go with the defined benefit pension plan or the defined contribution. Based on my age, I have retirement savings from previous employment. It's an appointed position, so I serve at the pleasure of the governor. The governor serves in 2-year terms. I felt for me, the best plan to go would be the defined compensation plan rather than the defined benefit plan.
Once you make a decision, is there the opportunity to change, or is it's a one-time you get to choose?
Yes, one time. Right?
With the
No,
exception if you go back to the classified service.
so if I had a different job, if I
Take my
if
job.
I or Doug's job, if I took one of their jobs in a competitive process, of course, I would have that choice again. I would have that, I could choose to go into the defined benefit plan.
I just have one more follow-up to that.
Sure.
When employees are presented with this choice, what type of resources are there for them to access? So they're made aware of these choices? Choosing retirement plans in general is really scary for most people. So I'm just
Right.
curious about the education that's provided to workers.
Yeah, it's a smaller percentage of our workforce. And as I said, those employees that make that choice are either about 42% of those are attorneys. And a lot of them are appointed officials. We do have an exempt employee handbook. And of course, the retirement office is always available to talk, and they have retirement counselors. And we also have our partner Prudential that also can talk to employees about what to choose. There's a certain amount of time it takes that you have to make that decision.
Okay.
What is that? Can you?
Right, so when a state employee is hired, exempt position, they're automatically default into the defined plan. Because it's no someone's actually paid for the whole something. We send a letter out, letting them know that they have an option of staying in defined benefit, one defined contribution. Some generic projections with multiple plans to give it a sense of what difference there are between. The commission statement can also comment on commission has 60 days from the date of that letter. Make a decision. If they don't make a decision, they'll stay in the fine.
Thank you.
So there's two
Oh.
questions. Regarding the 457 plan, the deferred comp plan, what percentage of employees take advantage of that?
I don't know.
Because
Off
I
the top of my
believe
head.
that's the plan where you can put somewhere close to $20,000 a year.
Mhm. And that's actually that's actually what I do. I max that out every year.
Yeah, I'd like to know what percentage.
It's a fairly large number.
We have that on all the VSERS data, and all the VSERS report, it talks about the number of people that are enrolled in that plan. I just don't have it at the top of my head. But, oh, great, thank you.
I'll let everyone.
It's always good to have the deputy treasurer in the room.
I just had a quick question that I missed as you were talking about it. When you were talking about at the top left of that page, the 25.5%, and then you said if you included the OPEB, was that on retired workers?
So-
What do you think it's 9%?
So the way, yes, so the way, I think this may be the same for I don't know how it works for the teacher system, but for the state employee system, there's no, we're paying for all of the retiree benefits out of the current costs of state
Okay.
government.
So it's the retirees.
So the OPEB portion in there, there's, that is the amount we're collecting as a percentage of payroll. Part of that goes basically directly to the treasurer's office, and they use that to pay for the retiree healthcare. Which
And
goes
the
back to
pay down the
HR.
Liability would take an extra 9%.
Right, it would take we'd have to add another 9% of the payroll to start paying that down. And we've been, that's one of the things that the groups have been looking at this for years, is how to pay down those four buckets of liability, and that's one of those.
Is that, when you said it's 9%, we don't, you just mean that that's how much it would cost?
That if we were to fund it the same way we are funding the ADEC, we would, that's what we would have, that was how we would do it. That's not the way we necessarily would do it as a state. That's.
Yeah, understood.
Beth, what percentage of exempt employees take part in the deferred compensation plan versus the defined benefit plan?
We have broken out
Compensation plan. I mean, they have two options, as I understand it. They can do the defined benefit or they can do the defined compensation plan. I was just interested in what percentage choose defined compensation versus defined benefit.
Just to clarify, I think the terminology there should be defined contribution.
Okay, I was just using the terms.
We
That's
should
what I
have said,
thought.
yeah.
but
Yeah, it is contribution.
DC versus DB. That's the percentage I'm interested in. Okay,
So, and it would only be a percentage of the 642. Right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it exempts.
Yeah.
only.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand that. It just intrigued.
Yeah.
But there are some classified employees in that plan, correct? If they started an exempt service, they could potentially remain in the defined contribution plan.
They'd have a balance, right? That would remain.
And they wouldn't have to be put into defined benefit.
If they like to stay in the defined contribution plan,
It still increased, but they could, if they went back and became a classified employee, they'd still keep their DC plan, right?
you can get that transferred to the defined benefit.
No,
No.
if they're an exempt employee and they just chose the DC plan, but then became a classified employee that only would be able to participate in the DB, they'd still have a balance in the DC.
No, they
You can't do both.
Or
choose to remain in the DC or pick DB. That's it.
Right, no, I'm-
If it's only DB or DC balance, their DC balance roll over to their DB.
oh, okay.
Along with their years of service.
Not one for one. Depends upon the salary at the time and what the value of the contribution, what their balances in the defined contribution plan. What that, how that translates, actuarial, calculation done to make sure that's not, that's actuarial. It's not
Right.
neutral, that they won't necessarily get the same years of service.
Because the employee share in the defined contribution is only 2.85%. That's all the employees are paying. Where if they were participating in the defined benefits plan the whole time, they'd be paying 6.65%. Is that the right amount of the salary? Right.
And is it can you make the assumption that the people who are on the defined contribution plan, because they started as exempt employees, are probably at a higher pay scale than the average salary of a state employee? I mean-
Probably, if you look at the salary for exempt employees versus the salaries of classified employees, the exempt salary, average salary is higher. So probably, but I don't have the
Yeah.
numbers behind that.
Okay.
The next slide is moving toward recruitment and retention of employees. We talk about the state of Vermont value proposition. And these are just some of the things that employees get in return for what they bring to the organization. So when they work for a state of Vermont, oftentimes we are a stable employer. So that might appeal to somebody who is looking for stable employment. And actually, I'm going to turn this over to you, Doug.
All right, the value proposition. This is a concept that we use a lot in our talent acquisition work in terms of, and marketers also use value propositions. And so it's how you define, given what we're going to give to someone come work for us. And so this isn't official, this is just a concept. So the stable employment is a big draw for us. And as I said, we're not going to go out of business, we're not going to be bought up by another corporation. And so people who value that kind of stability of a large organization are attracted to employment. So that's something that we can use in terms of our outreach to find new employees. Work with a purpose is a huge part of our value proposition. So people who are mission driven, who want to be public employees serving Vermonters are attracted to our organization. And we use that extensively in our outreach. You see any of the stuff that we do, we talk about making a difference and work that matters and things like that. And there's a significant number of people who are drawn to that kind of work. I say decent pay. So we generally are at or lagging the market. We do have consistent salary progression, so there's steps in our pay plan. But highly competitive pay is not a strong part of our value proposition. We're not going to get big bonuses if we meet or exceed sales expectations. It's just not part of being a public. Opportunity is something that, again, part of being a large organization. We have the opportunity to do training, development. People can move laterally and up in the organization. And there are people that started from the fairly lower level positions and become commissioners. So you can definitely build a career with us by moving around and taking advantage of the training and development that we have. So that's a very strong part of our proposition. The feather in our cap is our benefits, without a doubt. It's one of the strongest things that we have. So we have a fabulous medical benefits plan. It's a low deductible, low copay plan that covers all sorts of things. And in the market right now, generally what you're going to find is a high deductible plan with maybe an HSA. HSA would be great because they're making great investment options, but we can't do that. But it's attractive to a lot of people, our benefits. So our recruiters really plug the benefits. And sometimes those benefits will offset the pay differential. So we actually have a calculator on our website where you can plug in the numbers of what your pay is going to be and how much the state is contributing to your benefit plan. And often the numbers level out a little bit. And so you might take a little bit of pay cut, but you're going to get a much better benefit plan for your family. So that is one of the things that's just really stands out for us. And of course, a retirement plan. Every organization is going to have this value proposition and retirement part of it. And we have a defined benefit pension. And it is an important part of our overall value proposition, but it's far more complicated because a DB is attractive to, for instance, people who really like a stable employer, plan on spending an entire career with us, love a defined benefit. Because you know how much you're going to put in, you know how long you have to work, you know what you're going to get. And so people who like that stability are really attracted to the DB. We have other demographics. It varies by occupational group. So some occupations are very, it's a much stronger part of the value proposition. So troopers, for instance, that's a really big part of troopers don't generally grant your law enforcement officer. So it's that you're going to transfer to another department. And so part of that work is, also work with a purpose is extremely important for law enforcement. And so part of the thing is, mandatory retirement at 55 and a pension. And so it's very important for that occupation. There are other occupational groups that maybe aren't as focused on that. If you're a financial person, you can move around and do a lot of things. There are also generational differences. So we know, for instance, that millennials in particular, and also Gen Z tend to move around a little. Statistics are, move around from 3 to 5 years, changing jobs, and they hold 6 or 7 different jobs in their career. And so to them, it may not be quite as attractive as something that might have more portability. There's all sorts of things that are written about that. So in terms of recruitment, whatever happens in terms of the change in retention will change our value proposition and what we're trying to market to potential needs. One of the things that occurred, and it's a very interesting lens to look through this whole debate, is the value proposition. I think it's very different for recruitment versus retention. So recruitment, these are new people looking at this is the proposition that you're giving, what you're giving. For current employees, they already have something in their mind about what that value proposition was when they came. So I think that's what conceptually, you've heard a lot of people saying, well, that's not what I signed on for in your public testimony. But behind that is, in their mind, is this value proposition that they understood it to be a stable employer. They understood that they weren't going to get rich here, but they had great benefits and they had a unique and understood that that's what it is. So that's creates cognitive dissonance, and that they're like confused about why can that change. But a new employee is going to look at this and evaluate, does it work for me? And so there's a difference between whether it's going to affect our ability to recruit versus our ability to retain current employees. Yes.
I have a question, and maybe we'll get to this later, but I know in education nationally, we're facing a crisis on a teacher shortage, and getting teachers to stay, more than 50% or right around 50% leave the profession in the first 5 years of teaching. And in Vermont, it's catching up to us, the teacher shortage, and it's going to be a really serious problem. I'm wondering, for the state of Vermont hiring, how have you seen, the number of applications for positions coming in? What has that been looking like over the past couple of years?
That's a great lead into the next slide.
Fantastic.
Yeah, there we go. Unless there's any other questions, I'll go on to the next slide.
Before we jump to the next slide, I don't know if this is in the workforce report, but do we have a sense of how employees connect with this value proposition, how they value it? And this makes a lot of sense to me, but I just wonder how different groups of employees gravitate towards different parts, and I just don't know if we have any data on it.
I did see when you were talking about it as it relates to troopers. However, I did see Mike shaking his head. So.
All right. We were asked about hard to fill positions in our recruitment situation. I've been doing this for 30 plus years, and I've never seen a conversation mark. We have, right at the beginning of this week, we have 674 active job openings. That's more than I've ever seen before. 255 are currently posted and are accepting applications. The rest of that number are in the selection process. And statewide, our vacancy rate is 12%, and that's extremely high. Usually we run around 7%. So we have a lot of vacant positions with recruitment, and seeing intense competition and fewer applicants for job opening. Put a couple little things down here, but the average number of qualified applicants per requisition, which is per job opening, has dropped 25% in the last year. And FY20 was a difficult year after the pandemic. Now we're seeing fewer and fewer qualified applicants applying for our jobs. And it's not just us, it's, we talk to our colleagues in the private sector, it's all over the place, and it's all over the country. People are having a harder time. They have jobs. Drive down the street and every other business has a help wanted sign. So everybody's looking for talent. And it's hard And so if the number of requisitions that have 5 or fewer qualified applicants, it's gone up 42%. So we're approaching a third of our job openings. We only have 5 qualified people. That's not, that's ridiculous. That's personal. That 674 number is large because often they don't find anybody after it closes and they have to repost it, have to reopen it. So it's building, that number is building up, gradually, hiring, but it's really difficult. It's really difficult.
Sorry. Just curious if you have information on the number of people that are applying, what state they're applying from, where they're living, are these Vermont residents or these out-of-state residents?
I don't have specific percentages. Yeah, it's hard to mine our database because we don't, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's where we can add this. Right. I would say the vast majority of Vermont want to move here. So
I'm looking at your sampling of hard to fill jobs and I'm saying, what's left? Governor, maybe?
I almost at the end said everything. But you did ask for some of the sampling, but anything in IT is very, very hard to find right now, especially things like security, cybersecurity folks, PSAP dispatchers. We'll get the turnover in a little bit here, but our entry level emergency PSAP dispatchers turnover on entry level was over 80% last year. It's pretty hard to run a thing when you have 80% turnover. Troopers are all have been very difficult. Nurses, folks, food service workers that are institutional settings, mental health specialists, ER counselors, because of the degrees that are required to do that. Family services workers, also social workers. Correctional officers, I mean, you can't not look at the theater without seeing the crisis in staff. AOT maintenance workers. They just instituted $1,000 sign-on bonus for maintenance workers, a bunch of different classes. And there's great concern that they, that we are working as hard as we can to ramp up and have enough people to plow the roads. And so they just instituted $1,000 sign-on bonus. They also did that for custodians recently, because they can't find because of the wage differential. They can go to McDonald's and make $5 more.
Okay, I just have a quick question. So you're the Department of Human Resources. So how do you go about developing the other divisions and stuff when they're trying to ramp up interest and maintain and also attract people to the jobs? Do you encourage those different HR departments to have programs and different outreach when they're recruiting? Is that part of your duties, so to speak?
Have our division, the talent acquisition division, does recruitment for all, centralized recruitment for all departments.
Okay.
So aside, troopers have kind of their own unit that does recruiting, but all other jobs go through us. So we work directly with the department, with the hiring manager to develop a strategy at the very beginning of the process to say, where do you think we can find people, and we develop a social media strategy, other types of outreach that we do using their own networks and specialty sites. So if it's a financial site, things like that, websites where they post jobs. And so we customize a strategic kind of outreach for each job opening that we do. Right? And we work closely with the departments to with the corrections and so on.
Thank you.
I think that's
Yes. And turnover. We got turnover. I think somewhat the turnover charts, table 34, or the next ones are turnover, separations, and historical look of employee turnover and retirement eligibility. I think we can go through those. Well, maybe relatively, maybe not, but if you look at table 34, this is typical for our workforce report, and you just notice that overall turnover for fiscal year 21. So this is additional information that's not in our workforce report, but in 2020, turnover was down, and this is, I think that people were valuing stability during the pandemic. And then as we were coming out of it, that's when we started to see turnover, and much of that is related to retirement. But during the, in the heat of the crisis, I think people were, even if they were eligible to retire, they were kind of, they were staying. and then they said, well, maybe it's time for me to go. And I think there was certainly some people concerned about the pensions being changed, and that maybe helped inform some of their decision. But it was a high retirement year. Fiscal year 21 was a high retirement year, following a low year on 2020. Similar to fiscal year 2019 was one of the highest years we had. It's going to show on another page, but absent a retirement incentive. So they are pretty high retirement years, those 2 years. These just talk about people who leave the workforce and the reason they're leaving. So whether it's voluntary termination or involuntary termination or retirement. So all those graphs are kind of broken out by this way. And then we talk about the number of employees on table 35 and the percentage. And then the historical turnover going back to 1998 on table 31. And this is, yep, these all were updated with 21 numbers.
I'm wondering for when you're looking at the overall turnover with people leaving for retirement and voluntary termination, is there an exit interview process where people talk about the reasons why they're leaving the workforce, or is there any sort of survey data you have where people are marking why they're leaving the workforce? And if so, do you have that over the past few years, and are there changes in people's answers?
We don't have a common place to store exit interview data. So the many departments do collect that information and use that as part of ways to maybe improve their working conditions there. I know corrections has been taking their exit interviews very seriously, and the commissioner reads all of the exit interviews to see just to see how they're doing and why people are leaving. So that is an important, it's a good tool that you can use to see why. I think we know a lot of the reasons why people leave certain jobs, depending on what it is, if it's a pay or if it's a morale problem. We're not typically that surprised, I don't think, in exit interviews. Because a lot of times people say, hey, I got a new job and I'm getting paid more, or they usually tell you why they're leaving anyway. And one thing that is really good to do is, if you're really trying to do employee retention, is stay interviews and talk to those employees before they're leaving and have conversations with them about their careers and their career paths. And what do you think? Do you envision you're working here in 5 years? Why or why not? And try to get them to think about what it would take for them to stay and what career path they want to follow. So it's a more individualized approach, but that can really help towards employee retention.
Is that happening?
Not nearly as much as we would like it to.
Determinations don't include or people who are just switching jobs. Separations. I'm ready to figure out, but yeah, numbers will show how many people. Yeah.
It's on the workforce report, right?
As in, so total outflow by department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we've got just projected retirement eligibility by fiscal year. So clearly as you move forward in time, more and more employees, if they stay with state government, would be eligible to retire. And that's kind of what that's showing. And we show the numbers there too. And that's really good for workforce planning. If you if you estimate from your department, like a certain percentage of those eligible to retire will retire, then you can work on succession planning and what your recruitment needs might be going forward.
Can I ask a question about table 31? We've been talking a little bit in our task force about what happens when districts offer retirement incentives or buyouts or whatever you want to call them from district to district, and how that affects the pension system. It looks like also the state has provided a couple of times for that to happen too. And I wonder what those incentives were and why were they offered and how was that determined? It looks like there's a couple of errors.
Either Harold or Michael, maybe you could talk about those.
I know
They're before my
the
time.
history, and Michael, correct me if I get anything wrong. A couple different times, I think a $15,000 incentive was offered, and you get that in 2 different years. The actual reason for that was, I think they were trying to keep the level of workforce lower, and that would seem to only work if you don't allow people to fill those positions or equivalent positions immediately, at least. Michael may have been involved in part of that. I'm not aware of any follow-up studies that found that all the various actual impacts.
Although we didn't keep the positions open, most of them. Isn't that right?
Right, positions were, the number of other positions that were filled surpassed those other.
Yeah.
It was a wash.
It was less than a wash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
And the graph that we have, it was like on page 5 that talks about from 2011 to 2020. You can see, in between 2015 to 2016, the number of employees went down a little bit, but then when you look at the next year, it bounced right back up. So it didn't have the impact if that was a goal to reduce total payroll costs, which I expect it was, because that we had revenue
We were
issues.
talking about that on the teacher side. And then when I saw this, I was like, wait, the state did it to themselves?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes.
Yes.
So to follow up on table 31, that thread, it's probably a question really for Michael, but I'm thinking about what information the task force needs. And was there an analysis done at the time of those as to how it would affect the retirement system? Kind of wondering if that data is available. Thank you.
The money for the incentive, though, didn't come from the retirement system. That came from general fund, but
One more question. So would that be paid out as increasing total salary, or would that be separate? So if they were, had worked part of the year and had already made $70,000 and then took the retirement incentive, would that then have boosted their salary?
No, they effectively retired, and then NBC.
Okay.
So the question is, did you count those average time?
Correct.
Yes, it's not.
Okay.
I just particularly remember that caused so much turmoil in the office and all the different offices. And we're like, oh my gosh, it was quite a time.
I think we just have one more slide where Harold crunched some numbers, talking about. So I'm just gonna turn that on over to you.
Okay.
Yep. This is our last slide.
Well, what I wanted to do was dig down a little, drill down a little bit into the demographic data that we have and try to match some of that data to whatever we know about retirement on the HR side. Everything I'm going to talk about from now on in this meeting, the actuaries can and should do the work. So I'm just an analyst, I'm not an actuary. So. So I took a look at the biggest group of potential retirees, which is group F. There's two components to it, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I split it by things that one might be interested to look at when thinking about people retiring. There's a group from my calculations who are eligible to retire. This is data as of the end of FY20, who are eligible to retire because of their combination of their age and their service years, okay? And there were 318 of them. The average age was 65, average length of service was 19 years, and their average salary was around $72,000. Then there's a group who have 30 years of service in. They've maxed out their 50% benefit. There were 429 of those folks, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, where I have a suggestion that could probably save the pension system money, OPEB money, and give the employees some money.
Oh, the Harold win-win-win proposal. Yeah. I wanna hear
That
that.
would be. nice.
Subject to actuaries. Those folks are average age is 60, and that's important when we talk about an OPEB impact later on. They have pretty lengthy service, and average base salary was $80,000. Then there are some employees who could retire within 5 years. So the top two lines, those people could have retired right then. The additional people who could have retired within 5 years were another 671 folks. Their age is lower than the others. Their service is about 22 years. And you can see their base salary is around $75,000. And then I took a look at those not eligible to retire within 5 years. And that's a large group. That's over 1,500 people. And their average age is 47, and their average service is 17 years. The additional retired within 5 years and not eligible to retire within 5 years are critical groups. So it's important to take a look at that. And then there's the group F asterisk. And I don't know if you've discussed that, but that's group F folks who have started after July of 2008. And there's 4,700 of those. So you get a total of around 7,600, average age around 45, 46, length of service 11, and the salaries in the $63,000 range. So if you just looked at that bottom line, you wouldn't have all the detail that's above. So I wanted to give you that detail. I think that might be usable. Yes, you have a question?
Will we get this for all? Do you have this available for all the groups?
I don't have it available for group D or group C.
Okay, but you have it for
But
both.
the actual, well, that's the only groups left. Group A has one person.
Oh.
That'd be pretty easy.
Yes, could you get that for us? please?
Only at the average, though.
So I'd like to get to a suggestion based on this data. So if you look at the second line down, and I don't have a handout for it, so I'll walk through it down, try to be pretty careful about that. Look at the second group down, eligible max benefit 30 years of service. Those people could have retired right then, maxed out their benefit, etc. How many actually retired? If you go back into the presentations we gave you, it shows that of the eligible folks who could retire, only 20 to 25% do retire. So what I did is I took a look at those people that they retired during the year of FY21, and a quarter of them did. So I took a look at them specifically and said, what if they didn't retire? Okay. So if they didn't retire, by the way, their average final compensation was around 85,000. I mean, their average pay at the end was 85,000. Their average final compensation is always a little bit lower because your average over the last 3 years is around 82,000. If they did not retire, the state, the retirement system would have continued to get the 21.4%, which is about $18,000. They would have continued to get the 6.65%, which was around $6,000. I'm just rounding things here. They would have avoided paying out the pension, which at max is 41,000, and they wouldn't have to pay the health insurance, which for this group would be about 12,000. You add those up, you get about $77,000 that the retirement system gained by not having those people retired. So what's the incentive of the employee to not retire? If you have the employee not pay that 6.65%, that's about $6,000. Now, they're not going to get that full amount because that would be taxed, but still be a considerable amount of money for them to not retire. The net to the retirement system would be around $71,000 for these people to not retire. If you did that incentive and it incented these people to do that. If you just took a quarter of that number, the number is about 126 people. It's about 112 people. If you took a quarter of that number, so don't even assume all of them, half of them, you took a quarter of them, it could save the retirement system about $2 million. Now, I'm not an actuary, so there's some caveats. One of the benefits, and I had to write this down so I wouldn't forget, one of the benefits to the system is by doing this, you're not increasing their average final compensation. You're just allowing the person to not have to pay into the system. But since they get to stay as an employee, there are usually what folks call COLAs or across the board increases. So that would increase their pay a little bit, and that would affect their average final compensation. On average, this group is 60 years old. So the health insurance amount that is avoided by retirement is a pretty sizable amount. It also would allow the system to allow the person to get 1 year closer to Medicare. Medicare costs the health insurance is maybe a third, if not less, than the active. This data is based on the 21.4% that was in effect in FY20. Now you know it's 25.5% in FY22. So the savings, if you applied that, would be more like 75,000, 2.1 million or something like that. Not all employees would take the maximum 50%. Survivorship has been discussed in this committee, but they can take less if they want, say, their spouse to continue their benefit after they die. So this is definitely an actuary thing. My guess is it may all sort of come out in the wash, same amount of money. I don't know. Keeping these employees will admittedly continue to cost the state a fair amount of money on the employer side. But you would save it on the retirement side. So that's a suggestion for a small contingent where you might be able to save money.
But yeah, not only would you save it, it's an incentive for the employee to stay longer, and with the aging demographics and the changing demographics. So the baby boomers are aging out of the workforce, and there's not the younger people coming in to fill that workforce. It helps the state, could it potentially help the state with just our recruitment, our not having to recruit for those particular jobs. So it's just, it's one idea of, there's, many scenarios that could help, but it's just something that we just think it would be worth the committee looking at those types of things as well, and asking the actuary to provide some information on that, just to help with some of the decision-making and plan going forward.
I just want to thank you for that, because when we had the OPEB presentation last time, I was leaving thinking a lot about how could we give people incentives to stay, and it could work in the teacher system too. I think I really appreciate your representation on it.
Yeah, I think it could save money on the OPEB side, the pension side, and the employee gets benefit out of it.
Right. Thank you.
Many people retire and then go and get another job, but if you love your job that you have now, and we can give you a little bit of an incentive to stay, it's worth exploring.
Thank you. Thank you. As we go forward, we may end up having more questions. But, and I also would encourage people to look at the whole workforce report because it is pretty illuminating. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Just to answer Andrew's earlier question about the or the seven effort compensation, that's fine.
Okay, so we're going to jump to some demographics on the teachers' side here. Is that you? Okay. I didn't recognize you. Didn't recognize you, so I thought maybe. Okay.
So while we're switching chairs here, we'll just acknowledge that our way of collecting demographic information on the teacher workforce is slightly different because the teacher workforce is made up of dozens, hundreds of different employers, as opposed to the state workforce where we have one HR department. So
You can just hand them and we'll pass them down.
yeah. Well,
More than you need.
Yes, it's a supplemental. Take a quick look at the review.
Second grade.
Put in up to $19,000 each year. At 50%. Deferred comp. I know what's not.
I do.
No, that's good enough.
Deferred compensation.
Thought I had it. Good to clarify.
All right, let's jump. I believe you're Mark Haig.
I am Mark Hage. Yes.
Haig?
Hage.
Okay, great.
And I am the Director of Benefit Programs at Vermont NEA. Been in that position for a little over 20 years. And I'm a former school teacher and interest of full disclosure, a member of the Vermont State Teachers Retirement System.
Okay.
And
So I think that before you start that, because you weren't here when we introduced ourselves, and I think it would be helpful if you knew, because we are all appointed by different entities.
Thank
And
you.
it might be helpful for you to know where we're coming from.
that would be
So,
helpful.
Michael, if you want to.
Good to see you.
Peter Fagan, appointed by the district.
Andrew Emmerich, Vermont NEA.
Eric Davis, VSEA.
Jeanette White appointed by the Committee on Committees.
Sarah Copeland Hanses appointed by the speaker.
John Gannon, appointed by the speaker.
Katie Pan, appointed by the
You know what? VSEA.
Dan Trotter, Troopers Association.
Corey Parent, appointed by the committee.
Thank you. I should also add to my introduction that I am here today strictly in my capacity as the trust administrator, a trust administrator of the Vermont Education Health Initiative, VHI, which provides health benefits to school districts and to visitors. Normally, when I'm in this building presenting about VHI matters, I'm accompanied by my colleague, Bobby Jo Sauls, but as you will see in the introductory statement in the document that is in front of you, she is taking a much-deserved vacation this week, and so I am running solo. I also want to say that the numbers that I'm going to review with you today are exclusively from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont. I had initially attempted to fuse numbers between Visitors and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont and discovered that the differences between them were quite negligible. And it required a lot more narrative to explain the differences than you probably have time to hear about and that I could probably make clear for you. So there is a line here, however, that says certain figures were provided by Visitors. When I made the decision not to include the Visitors numbers, I neglected to delete that sentence. I will do so after this hearing and send you a clean copy and a correct copy of this document. So I was asked to provide a very nice prep conversation with Representative Copeland-Hanzas, aggregate data on the number of school employees and dependents in the active workforce who are enrolled in VHI benefit plans and the number of retirees and their dependents enrolled in VHI health benefit plans through Visitors, those who are not yet Medicare eligible and those who are enrolled in Medicare. And you will see at the bottom of this page 2 tables that lay out those numbers for each of those populations respectively. So in respect to the active enrollees and their dependents, we have in total, as of July 1, 33,393 school employees and their dependents in active VHI benefit plans. And you can see here the breakout between employee subscribers and dependents. In the VHI world, when we talk about subscribers and dependents together, we refer to them usually as covered lives. So there are 33,393 covered lives through the active workforce that get their health insurance through their school district and thus through VHI. Now you'll notice there are 14 people for whom Medicare is primary, even though they are active employees. And that's unusual because if you have employer-sponsored coverage and you are Medicare eligible, but you're still working, if you enroll in Medicare, it's usually supplemental. The employer coverage is primary. In this case, it's primary for the small number of people because some of them have disabilities or they have end-stage renal disease, which qualifies them for primary Medicare coverage, even though they are continuing to work. And then there are some COBRA implications here as well that allows Medicare to be primary. If we turn to the Visitors population, looking at retiree enrollee and dependents, you will see at present, Medicare enrollees, 7,622. That is subscribers and dependents combined. Medicare doesn't offer 2-person plans the way active workforces are entitled to them or have access to them. So if you're the spouse of a Medicare retiree in Visitors, you have a single Medicare plan, if you will. Your spouse, the retiree, has a single Medicare plan. 7,622 enrollees and dependents Medicare eligible. For the non-Medicare, significantly smaller number, just under 1,100, for a total of 8,720. I want to speak to the volatility, if I can, of the numbers in the active workforce. Volatility is probably not the right word here. What I want to say is, from a month-to-month basis, these numbers can vary pretty dramatically. They can rise or fall upwards to 300 in the space of a month. So for example, on July 1 of 2020, there were 35,000 active enrollees, active school employees in VHI. At the end of open enrollment in December of 2020, there were approximately 33,300 people. So these numbers can really vary for the reasons you would expect. People are born, people die, they get married, they adopt children. Their children go on or off the health insurance plans. People are hired, people's employment terminates for various reasons. So there's a lot of flux, or can be. However, and this is a consequence of speaking with Representative Copeland-Hanzas, I went back and I looked at the average number of members in the active workforce over a 4-year period, 2017 to 2020. And what I found is that the average was within a span of 34,300 and 34,600. So when you look at the numbers on average over the course of a year, at least for those last 4 years, we haven't seen a lot of change. But on a month-to-month basis, that is not unusual. So why don't I pause there for a moment and see if you want to talk about these numbers or have any questions about them.
In the Medicare enrollees, the
Sure.
7,622. So that includes spouses as well as retirees.
Right, correct. I'm sorry, Andrew.
The 13,960, is that including ESPs or is that just people on professional contracts?
That's every school employee. It's teacher, that's a good question. Teacher, support professional, administrator in any capacity, unionized and non-unionized.
On the non, on the Easter non. Those folks who,
Correct. They're less than 65. They're not yet eligible for Medicare. Well, if you have any other questions about the numbers, you can. Yeah, please, Mike.
the actual teachers, that includes different groups other than just teachers.
Are we talking about the active workforce? Yes.
Does that include people who are not part of this year's retirement plan?
Yes.
So we just-
Correct. It's every school employee, regardless of job classification, who meets the eligibility threshold for coverage under either the collective bargaining agreement or their local individual contract or the terms of statewide bargaining.
That would include employees of the school district who are actually members of the municipal retirements.
That is correct. In fact, it would include a large number. Okay, again, please feel free to come back to these numbers at any point. And if there's additional numbers you need from VHI or from VHI and Visters, Michael and I have worked together a lot of years, and I've worked with his exceptional retirement specialists. If those numbers are needed and you need to get more granular with them, please let us know. We'd be happy to oblige. So on the flip side of this front page, thought it might be helpful for you to have a sense of the health insurance plans that enrollees in Visters can choose both prior to Medicare eligibility and once they are enrolled in Medicare. So for those approximately 1,100 individuals in Visters who are not yet enrolled in Medicare or eligible for Medicare, there are three primary plans that are available to them. And you can see them here, the Vermont Health Partnership, the $300 comprehensive plan, and the JY plan. Now, these plans were available to most school employees in virtually all school districts prior to January 1 of 2018, when VHI transitioned to 4 new plans, high deductible health plans predominantly, at which point these plans were no longer available to school districts, but they remained options for the Vermont State Teachers Retirement System for the non-Medicare population. The Vermont Health Partnership, VHP, is a managed care product. It was by far the most popular plan for active school employees before it was no longer available at the end of 2017. The 300 comprehensive plan has exactly the same benefits and networks. By networks, I mean the doctors you can see, the hospitals you can get care at, et cetera. Same pharmacy networks and benefits. It's identical in networks and it is identical in benefits to the JY plan. Those two plans are identical. Right? No difference between them except how cost sharing is structured. So that $300 in the title references a $300 deductible upfront, first dollar, that the employee or patient is responsible for all medical services except preventive services that come at no cost under federal regulations or law. There is an additional $300 of co-insurance annually in addition to that deductible for single tier coverage. So what that means is in a calendar year for this particular plan, worst case financial scenario, the enrollee has an out-of-pocket liability maximum of $600. Now, again, that is just for medical care. This plan also has a 3-tier pharmacy program, $5 copay for generics, $25 for preferred medications, $45 for brand name medications. And that is true for the JY plan as well. So if I have a single tier coverage, I'm looking at, as I said, a $600 maximum out-of-pocket liability in the calendar year. And if I have 2-person coverage or family coverage, I'm looking at a $1,200 maximum out-of-pocket liability under the $300 comprehensive plan. In the Vermont Health Partnership, almost all of the services, I think actually all of them, come with some kind of copay. I think it's $15 for primary care, $25 for specialty, $15 for telemedicine, $50 for an ambulance service, $25, I believe, for maternity visits, et cetera. And it has the same pharmacy benefit as the 300 comp, $5 for generic, $25 for preferred, $45 for brand name medications. And it operates within a slightly tighter medical network, but not significantly so than the 300 comp. Vermont Health Partnership requires you to designate a primary care physician. Both of those plans were introduced, I believe, in the mid to late 1990s. So they've been around for some time. The JY plan has a much longer lineage, goes back to, I think, the late 70s, early 80s. It was initially the JYA plan, then it became the JYB plan, and then it was the JY plan. It changed a little bit with each evolutionary move. It too, like the Vermont Health Partnership, most services require a copayment, a modest copayment of $15 or $20. There is a deductible, I believe, for medical durable equipment of approximately $100. I think there's a deductible in co-insurance too for private duty nursing. But for the medical services that most people need on a regular basis, it too is a copayment. It's essentially an old style indemnity plan. And as you can see, the number of covered lives in it is quite low. It has been shrinking pretty dramatically over the last 10 years. And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. First is the premium is significantly higher than it is for the 300 comprehensive plan. But it does not offer additional benefits nor expanded access to medical care. And over the course of the last 20 years, I have been working with the retirement specialists at Visters to sponsor and present retirement workshops on the benefit plans and pension services and pension plans of Visters. And we have really stressed over those 20 years that people be as informed as they can be about why they're making the choices they do between health insurance plans. It's very common for folks to presume that a higher premium means more benefits or better benefits or expanded networks, and that is simply not the case here. For a number of historical reasons we don't need to get into. And I think what we have seen over time is the benefit of that education, both through the workshops, through the very fine work of the Visters retirement specialists, and also through VHI's educational efforts independently. And I think folks have realized that, you know what, I can get really good care through the 300 comp or the VHP plans and pay significantly less. And thus we've seen a lot of migration out of JY. Eric.
Mark, process question. You mentioned that all active teachers used to be in the Vermont Health Partnership. Now they're doing something else. When a teacher retires, do they then choose one of these options? Is that how it works?
That is correct. So if I'm in the Gold CDHP plan now offered by VHI, where most active employees and dependents are enrolled, when it comes time to retire, and this is something we stress a lot at the retirement workshops, I will have to apply for or enroll in through the application process through Visters, one of these three plans, if I'm not yet eligible for Medicare. So every active employee is going to be in a different health insurance plan once they transition to Visters, assuming they elect health insurance through Visters and they're eligible for a premium subsidy. Please.
Just making sure here, so that I don't assume anything when you talk about that they have Medicare. That means they had A, whichever one's entitled to the 65. They purchased Part B. Correct. Now they don't necessarily purchase D or an Advantage plan or whatever else, but those are the two that they have. And they,
so that is actually a very nice transition to the next part of this document. Thank you for that lead. So to the point that was just made, when I become eligible for Medicare, when a retiree is eligible for Medicare and enrolls, and they're going to stay in Visters for their health insurance, and most transition from a non-Medicare status to a Medicare eligibility status with Visters, I need to be enrolled in Part A, I need to be enrolled in Part B, and I need to show documentation of that to the retirement system. Without that documentation, I am not entitled to the premium subsidy as a retiree. The premium subsidy requires documentation that you have enrolled in Part A and Part B. That is mandatory. Okay. The question about Part D, which is the pharmacy benefit, is a little more complicated because as you look at the first two plans for the Medicare enrollees and Visitors, both of those plans, the 300 comp and the JY, they're the Medicare supplement version of the two plans I just spoke to. So now Medicare is primary and the JY and the 300 comp transition to supplemental status, and they, if you will, wrap around Medicare, provide supplemental services and benefits to Medicare. Thus, the need for Part A and Part B. They have embedded RX coverage, the same RX formulary benefits and cost-sharing arrangements in the non-Medicare enrollee plans are also in these supplemental plans. Again, built right into the plans. So if I, as a retiree, elect the 300 comprehensive plan, as you can see, the great majority do, then I don't need to shop for a Medicare D plan. If, however, I choose the Vistar 65 supplemental plan, this is a standard Medicom plan. It's been offered by Vistars for many years. It's gone through some different name changes along the way. But this plan covers medically everything Medicare covers. So if you've ever seen the Medicare and You booklet, if you're Medicare eligible now, or you're enrolled in Medicare, it comes in the mail, you can download it. It's over 100 pages. And it's devoted primarily to all the medical benefits that Medicare provides. That's the bulk of the narrative in the document. And every medical service that Medicare provides, Vistar 65 is supplemental to. It does not, however, provide RX coverage, not even an aspirin. So if you're in the Vistar 65 supplemental plan, you're going to have very comprehensive Medicare sanctioned care for all of your medical services, Part A, Part B. Part A, as you probably know, we're talking about hospital services, primarily inpatient. And for Part B, generally, we talk about physician services and hospital outpatient services. So then you need to shop for Medicare Part B. Some of you may recall when the Medicare Part D program rolled out in around 2003, respectfully, it was a mess. I was inundated with calls from members who were trying to figure it out for themselves or were trying to figure it out for their parents, which meant I had to try to figure it out. And I have to confess, I was not very good at it. The system, fortunately, today is much easier to navigate and to understand. And Medicare has gotten, CMS has gotten a whole lot better at counseling and providing resources. And you can find the Medicare D plan for as low as $11 a month. Now, I don't know what you get for $11 a month in pharmacy. Can't be all that much, but these approximately 1,300 people who are enrolled in Vistar 65, in my experience, tend to be individuals who have very good health and they have no or negligible RX costs. And so it is a very smart move on their part to enroll in this, particularly for people who have single coverage only, because the Vistar's subsidy, premium subsidy for single coverage, covers the entire cost of this premium. So for folks in the Vistar 65 with single coverage, no deduction is coming from their pension for premium costs. They are on the hook themselves for whatever Medicare D costs that they purchase on their own. And I have to say that first workshop I ever did for Vistars, actually it was for VHI, but I was with a Vistars crowd. And there was a 80-year-old woman in the audience who had the forerunner of this plan. And I said, ma'am, you understand there's no RX coverage with this plan. She says, young man, I don't need drugs. And it is a lesson that has been driven home to me on any number of occasions in other workshops or in private meetings with members or retirees. And so for these 1,300 folks, this plan works just fine. And remember too, unlike the pension election for a retiree, your health insurance election as a Vistar's retiree, that first choice you make when you retire at either of these divisions, whether you're non-Medicare or Medicare, you're not locked in for life. You can move to a different health insurance plan over the course of your retired career. Retired career, that's an unusual phrase, retired life. As provided you have been in the plan you elected for at least 12 months. So those 1,260 people, there may come a time when their Medicare D needs are much greater than when they initially enrolled in Medicare D. And when open enrollment comes around, they can choose to move from Vista 65 to the 300 comp or the JY supplement, where the RX benefit is embedded, and there's a copay structure that will probably be more affordable for them. Andrew, please.
Yeah, so you can, once you've elected one plan, you can change the plan that you enroll in.
That is right.
Okay. And then another question, not really related to that. Insurance is definitely not my specialty. It's just it's a tough one for me to always wrap my mind around. But I'm curious, what would happen, there's lots of talk about healthcare reform at a state level or national level. Senator Sanders is talking about decreasing Medicare age down to 60 or 50. What happens to school employee costs for health insurance if that were to change, or OPEB funding? And maybe you're not.
No, that is a great question. I'll confess I've not yet tried to cost that out, and nor has VHI. I did see a national study published in Health Affairs that, if I'm remembering correctly, projected that lowering eligibility to Medicare to age 60, I think it was, would save the country nationally in the neighborhood of $300 billion. Don't quote me on that. I can go back and look if it's of interest to you. But there's no question that if people had access to Medicare sooner, employers and employees would probably see a pretty significant reduction in costs, because so much of the cost would then be shifted to the federal tax base.
So that's something we can take control of.
I would love if we could.
No, you're welcome.
Any more questions?
Final comment, if I may. I was going to bring you all a copy of the Vistas benefit booklet. No life is complete without one. However, I discovered that I did not have enough copies in my own office, which is a little embarrassing. Although the booklet is now actually being, as annually re-looked at again. So I provided the link here to the booklet if you'd like to sort of dive into the health plans in more detail and see how those cost sharing structures are arranged and the benefits they're associated with. And I can also provide you with a benefit booklet link if you'd like to the active plans as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your time.
Okay, committee, what is your pleasure here? Do you need to take a short break, or do you want to just dive into the, we have some Mainlands Committee discussion now about what we talked about earlier and about what other information we need, responses to the treasurers.
I think we should take a 10-minute break and then come back and, the discussion points that we listed on the agenda were just sort of our best guess at what people might want to talk about or that we'd like to prompt people to think about, but we can certainly just come back and
Push it all
block off
together.
some of that time to talk about the agenda for next meeting.